How are those typically treated if somebody is wanting to keep the house? What are we usually doing with that mortgage?
The mortgage is going to attach to.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Holly Mullin. I'm the managing partner at Sterling Law Offices. I have with me today attorney Jeff Morrell. Thanks for joining us, Jeff.
Glad to be here.
Jeff is a senior partner in our Appleton office, and he's joined us in the past. I'm always grateful to have him on the show because he has just a very insightful background, a lot of experience in family law, and can always shed light for us on some tricky topics. So today we are going to be dealing with one of those tricky topics, which is debt in divorce. So seems like, Jeff, when we talk to our clients, the focus is always on the money, like the assets, how we go about dividing assets. And we spend less time really focusing on the other side of that coin, which is the negative column, the debt. So you've talked to us previously about dividing assets. So I want to pick your brain about dividing these debts. So give us the gist, the generics in Wisconsin. What's the presumption when it comes to dividing debt in divorce?
Yeah, it's the same as they treat assets. It's because it's just the flip side of an asset. It's presumed to be equal division. You're each equally responsible, whether you knew about the debt or not.
And give me like a quick little list of what are some of the debts that we often see in divorce cases.
They're the type of debts that most people have. It's the ones you would expect. Of course, there's exceptions, but most people have a mortgage. Most people have a car loan. Most people have at least a little bit of credit card debt. Some people have a lot of credit card debt. And that's normal too. There'll be nothing, your finances will not surprise your divorce lawyer, no matter how scary they may look to you. I certainly have plenty of clients that come to me. I'm sure you've had the same, Hollywood. They're very embarrassed about their financial picture, but it's nothing new under the sun here. We've seen it. So car loans, medical debt's very common, especially people with families, and student loans are another, personal loans and loans to family members.
Yeah, both real estate and income taxes, we see those. So I think what you just said is a really good little tidbit, which is let it all out there, right? Now's not the time to try and sugarcoat anything. When you're talking to your divorce attorney, we want to pick up all the rocks and find the slugs under and air it all out so we can clean it up and make sure that we're setting our clients off on a really good financial plan when the divorce is over. Okay, so you mentioned mortgages, right? So the debts attached to houses. How are those typically treated if somebody is wanting to keep the house? What are we usually doing with that mortgage?
The mortgage is going to attach to the house. So if you're taking the house, you're taking the mortgage generally.
What if both parties' names are on the mortgage, like they're jointly titled on it?
Yeah, it's really going to depend on the circumstances. There's different routes you can take. Sometimes the other party's willing to stay on the mortgage or willing to stay on it for a period of time. That's always a really big topic of conversation today because of interest rates being as high as they are. But generally, the court's going to want the person retaining the house to refinance the mortgage into their name or get an assumption of mortgage. That's going to be between you and your bank, whether or not you can get an assumption. That's where they essentially just remove the other person, allow you to assume the entire mortgage.
So we talk about refinancing, right? Like we've heard that phrase a lot. What does that mean to those out there who maybe have never gone through a refi process?
Refinancing is essentially taking out a brand new loan. It's a brand new mortgage. They make it sound like it isn't, but same with a loan modification, is very similar. It doesn't sound like a new loan. It's a brand new mortgage. And oftentimes people are doing refinancing to get the other person off the loan so that they're not liable on the loan anymore. Meaning if I stop paying and my ex-wife is on the loan, the bank is going to go to her and it's going to impact her credit score. So if I'm keeping it in this hypothetical divorce, I need to have that refinanced. And then if I do refinance it, then I'm the only one that's liable under that loan. And I might want to do that also to pull some equity out of the house at the same time.
And so when you're saying a whole new loan, you're talking, okay, you're going to individually, if you're saying I'm trying to get my spouse off this mortgage and I need to refinance it, put it in my own name, you're going through underwriting and having to qualify. You're having to probably lose your interest rate. If you were one of the lucky ones in 2021 and you have that 2.5%, 3% interest rate, you're going to be looking to double your interest rate if you're refinancing in today's rates. You're paying for an appraisal, you're paying the closing costs. That's all part of the package.
Not insignificant.
Okay, so what if you're the only one named on the mortgage? You want to keep the house and you're the only one named. Do you have to do anything there?
Have to is always a relative term because it depends on what your spouse is willing to work with you on. But the general flow chart you can follow is if you took out the loan prior to the marriage and it's in your name only, and you didn't refinance the mortgage during the divorce, remember, a refinance is a brand new mortgage, then a court probably isn't going to make you refinance that. But if you took it out during the marriage or refinanced it during in the state of Wisconsin, that debt is community property, meaning it's a marital debt, meaning let's say something happened to the house. The only way, these are pretty unlikely scenarios, but they are possible. Let's say you didn't pay the insurance bill, the house burned down, the bank wants to be paid back their $300,000 or $400,000 for the house. You don't have it, you declare bankruptcy. They're going to look and say, oh, wait, Jeff was married during that time. Who was the ex wife? We're going to go after her for the money now. And so when they're sufficiently motivated, like they've got a big loss on their books, not typically like for a foreclosure, then they can go after that spouse, even though they weren't on the mortgage.
So I think just summarize that in a short snippet is basically doesn't really matter whose name's on a debt, right? If you're married, a creditor doesn't care who is actually on the loan application. If you were married when that loan came out in Wisconsin, the creditor can still come after you. That's what you're saying. So you mentioned with the mortgage when I asked, okay, if you want to keep the house and you say the mortgage is attached to the house, is that kind of a true statement across the board? Then say a car loan is another asset often attached to the debt. If you're keeping a car, what are we doing with the auto loan?
Yeah, that's typically the case. I've certainly seen cases, I'm sure you have, Holly, where one person takes the car, the other person is paying the car loan, and that's just how the deal worked out. It's less common. It's just most common that the car, like if you're going to take the car, you're going to take the loan that goes with the car too. From an administrative, like clerical perspective, that makes a lot of sense too. Dealing with the lien and the title and the financing company, if they have to interact with your ex-spouse, avoid that whole mess. Just take the loan yourself. But refinancing for auto loans is less common. It's not impossible or even uncommon necessarily, but I wouldn't say that's the standard.
Got it. Yep, that makes sense. Kind of shifting over a little bit to you start talking with a client about dividing debt. And let's say there's a whole bunch of credit card debt. We're talking in the tens of thousands. And the client, I've heard this, I'm sure you've heard it, and they say, my spouse was the one spending all the money. Like they were the one spending. Is that a defense to not having to divide it? Is it to say that one of the parties was the bigger spender?
By far the hardest part of processing through a divorce for many couples or for many people going through divorce is that I was the one that made the money. Like I was the one going to work and producing the paycheck for the household, or I didn't know about this debt, or I didn't do the spending. And it was her irresponsible spending, and I was never okay with it, or it was his going on fishing trips, and I never okayed that. I never knew we had some debt. I didn't know we had that much. It's the hardest part, but the law makes it really clear. It's to be equally divided unless you can show marital waste, which is pretty hard to do and relatively uncommon. It's going to be divided equally. And that's part of Wisconsin's community property law. It's written in such a way as to avoid confrontation. The legislature in the state of Wisconsin said we want people going through divorce to keep their money in their pockets, not be forking it over to their lawyers if we can avoid it. So we're going to take this argument off the table. It's equally divided.
Go down the middle, and then we don't have to get into the dirty laundry of who was spending and who was saving. So you said the word waste. I want to dig into that more. What do you mean when you say unless you can prove somebody wasted the money or engaged in marital waste, you're going to have to divide it? So you touched on an exception. What is marital waste?
Waste is almost something divorce lawyers are hesitant to bring up, in my opinion, because most people going through divorce can probably point to something and say that was wasteful. And that doesn't mean like you made a bad purchase and like you bought a car that ended up being a lemon. What it means is that you made purchases or spent money or resources that were not for a marital purpose. And marital purpose is a very wide net. So we're talking about things like really significant or serious gambling or substance abuse issues, spending money on an affair like a mistress, like on a vacation or jewelry for that extramarital relationship. Those things could be considered waste. Usually what we're telling our clients is, look, we're of course going to look at this, but more often is the case that the spending is relatively insignificant. We can use that lever in negotiations, but it's less likely you're going to get credit for that money that's been spent or wasted. Sometimes it's really significant. Sometimes people have problems with online scams or online girlfriends or boyfriends, things like that.
We've all heard it as divorce attorneys, right? We've all heard my spouse accumulated all of this. It was all wasted money. And then trying to prove it, even when we know somebody's having an affair, trying to prove that money spent say a restaurant charge, even a hotel charge, is trying to prove that the other, it's like, yeah, that looks odd, right? It looks weird that they spent $100 at a restaurant and that wouldn't have been for two people, or spent the night at a hotel. But trying to prove that the other person was actually involved in that dinner or at that hotel stay, the affair partner, that's a really hard thing. It's not just a common sense analysis, it's actual evidence that if you want it excluded, you're the one with the burden of proof having to show it, which is going to be incredibly difficult, trying to go back months without any receipts. You just have a credit card statement.
I can't just say, look at all these gift card purchases. What else would they be for if not for prostitution? And that's not going to come, that's not going to be evidence that I can use. It's just me saying, what about this? And you're totally right. The burden's on me. If I'm the one trying to claim that there's waste, I've got to show, hey, there's waste here.
Let's talk about maybe any other exceptions that don't involve waste. Is there any other type of debt that you've seen routinely perhaps excluded when it comes to divorce settlements, in terms of not being divided down the middle or being added into the overall property division analysis?
Yeah, and I think that's a good point to bring up too, Holly. It's not that necessarily that a debt's being divided; it's being included in looking at all of your assets and all of your debts. It's hard to take a credit card balance and just split it in two. There's ways to do it, but it's less common. Usually, one person's going to take it, and then we make up for it somewhere else in the property division. The exceptions. There's two kinds. There's official, there's unofficial. The exceptions to property division, there aren't any on the debt side, but in property division, there are for things that you get by gift or inheritance. The unofficial exceptions are going to vary dramatically by county, but student loans are often brought up as one of those things that, look, I'm a lawyer, I have student loans. If I get divorced, I have significant student loan debt, but I also have a much higher earning capacity as a result of that degree. And so I'm going to carry with me the benefit of that education. And my spouse, my soon to be ex spouse, would not. So in those situations, courts will often say, you're taking that debt and your spouse doesn't have to pay anything for it. It's different if there is substantial maintenance that's going to be paid, alimony, but that's less common. Usually at the point where you're going to owe maintenance and you're making that much money, the student loans are often paid off, but it always varies. And then like premarital debt is often brought up if you came into a marriage, especially if it's a very short-term marriage, like a couple of years at the most.
That they may rewind and consider the fact that, oh, you brought this in and we're going to make you keep it.
And then there's the third one, which is personal loans or debts to your family that a court might not recognize as legitimate. So if let's say that your parents loaned you $20,000 10 years ago and they said pay back when you get around to it, and now you're trying to include that in the divorce, court might not say, okay, we're going to include that. They might say, we don't believe you, get out of here. They've never collected on it. There's no paperwork. Even if there is paperwork, I don't believe that your parents are going to actually hold you responsible. That's going to vary judge by judge and county by county. But that's a third exception.
My mom lent me $20,000 5 years ago. I even have a note to show. I signed it. It's a loan. I owe it back. And then you press the client and say, have you been getting a monthly statement showing interest accruing? Like, where are we at on this? Is your spouse signed this note? No, we just trust to pay it. And that's going to be really tough for me to sell this to the court as a standing, legit loan if you've made zero payments on it and received zero statements on it and your spouse didn't sign off on it.
And I'm sure you've seen this, Holly, too. I've seen it for entire mortgages where the parents bought the house in cash, wrote a mortgage to the kid, has never, and it's just for tax purposes that they're checking their boxes. No payments are actually being made, and that entire house is considered paid off because the courts look at it as an illusory loan. It's called an illusory loan. It doesn't actually exist.
Yeah, that becomes really tricky for us to deal with. This has been really insightful, Jeff. Some important takeaways for our listeners, things that they should really keep at the forefront if they're either contemplating a divorce or even going through a divorce right now?
Making sure you are aware of all the debts is the most important thing. And if you're in significant amounts of debt, which is not uncommon for people generally, but definitely for people going through divorce, it's easy to get into a cycle where we pretend certain debts don't exist. We avoid them and we forget about them. We stash them away until we don't see them anymore. Don't avoid them in your divorce process because now is the time to deal with them. It's much easier to deal with them before than to clean up the mess afterwards. Get a credit report done. Make sure that you're aware of everything that's out there, even if it's painful to deal with, even if it makes your outcome look not as good as you were hoping. And then I always look for solutions for my clients wherein they're going to exit the divorce process. Their new life is going to start debt-free or as close to it as possible. Being burdened by debt is never fun. And providing a springboard for your next chapter, I think, is one of the best things we can do for our client.
Meaning
To
pay
make
it
sure
off
that
before the divorce is done.
structure the deal such that the client's not going to have debt or is going to have sufficient cash to pay off that debt, especially like higher interest debt like credit cards and things like that. And be realistic about what you can afford. Everyone wants to hold on to their house, and it can be hard to let go of that dream and to have to reevaluate, because in divorce, our financial options are necessarily constrained. We are limited by what we have available to us, and what we have available to us is less than what we had before. So sometimes having to make those tough decisions, but all of your options on the table.
Yeah, that's great advice. It's just being realistic. What's your budget? Don't want it up in the red. I mean, that's not a happy or healthy way to live, is to be house poor, to be car poor, those situations. So that's really great advice, Jeff.
It's really hard to do, to go from, I used to be able to afford this and I can't afford this now. That is much harder than saying, I love that house, but I can't afford it. Like one that you're considering buying. You can say, oh, it's just not in the budget. But it's much harder to say, what I have right now is no longer in the budget. That's tough.
Because people come into a divorce having heard these phrases of like, well, you'll get to continue your lifestyle, right? And it's like, I always have to look at people and say, look, the reality is you're going to be paying for two households when you guys used to collectively pay for one. So, of course, things are going to change in terms of budgets, and it's not necessarily look the same. We try to keep you guys comparable post divorce, but being able to promise someone that they will be able to afford everything they enjoyed during the marriage is just not a reality a lot of the times, unfortunately. And we have to deliver that blow.
It's almost never this true. Unless you're putting away money every month in savings, significant amounts, you're going to have less money to play with. You've got 2 utility bills now. You've got half the number of people helping you around the house if your spouse was helping you. You lose economies of scale in relationship, like insurance bundling and cell phone bundling. All that stuff goes out the window, and it's all little like death by a thousand cuts, but you're not going to be able to afford to live the way that you did previously. And so we got to look at what's realistic, what can provide you more options moving forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is great, Jeff. Thank you so much for joining us, for
No
sharing.
problem.
It's good for us to be thinking about the whole picture of divorce, not just in terms of the assets and the support, but also about how to untangle ourselves from debt, especially joint debt that can keep you tethered to an ex-spouse in an uncomfortable way after a divorce. So this was excellent advice. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And when it comes to untangling joint debt, the bigger picture really is how all the property, assets, and liabilities get divided. That's where things can get complex fast, especially if you're not clear on what is considered marital property versus not. We break that all down in this next video, including how Wisconsin courts decide who gets what and why. Click here to watch.